On a warm summer Monday, that in the morning up in the Northeast almost felt like it could have been a fall day, but still was just too warm, although not too humid, after a whirlwind of more hot weather and really flood torrential downpours in parts of my state this weekend. Welcome to another episode of the Logic and Larry podcast. I am your host, Larry K. Like to welcome back in all the listeners from the last episode, all the longtime listeners, all the newcomers on YouTube and beyond. We did have an influx of some new watchers, some new listeners from the last episode. Some people feeling quite strongly about some of the things I said and some of the provocative sections of the last podcast. Remember, I will be releasing different sections, especially on YouTube, but to get the full context of what was discussed, it's really best to tune in to the full show, which is available on all major streaming platforms and on YouTube. So, by the way, if you're watching on YouTube, click the subscribe button. It's right here. Let's help this show grow so we can put out more of the logic and objectivity into the world. If you are a listener who's not on YouTube, head on over to YouTube, search the Logic and Larry podcast, and click subscribe. It's much appreciated. It helps us to grow. And if you can't click subscribe, you can't get yourself there yet, at least click the like button. As always, the opinions expressed on this show are my own personal opinions as a private citizen. Nothing said on this show reflects in any way the opinions or positions of any other organization, any other entity, or any other person. This is me simply speaking in my private capacity on matters of public concern. But we keep it real. So this isn't one of the new episodes that I had in mind with a theme. Those are still on the way, and our Heroes and Justice episode is still on the way. But just given all the news that's been flying around, this summer, but especially in the last week or two, I wanted to just kind of do a quick news rundown and talk to you guys out there as we're kind of getting towards midsummer. Isn't it crazy how it flies so fast? By the end of June, you think, oh, wow, it's only June, but it's hot already. It's not even July yet. We got the whole summer still. But by the end of July, you see, oh, boy, August is going to creep up. And before you know it, the second half of August is, football camp is in full gear. Back to school is in full gear. And, your vacations or whatever are winding down. You're getting ready for that Labor Day weekend. And then you're back to work on that fall, autumn grind. So it's kind of crazy how fast the summer's moving. But I wanted to touch on what better subject, right? What more do we want to talk about this summer? What could better encapsulate the things going on in our world than explosive diarrhea, right? Let's talk about explosive diarrhea, the cyclosporiasis, if that's how you say it, that's out there, contaminating what they think is some sort of produce. That's that much they know. They don't know if it's lettuce. They don't know if it's berries. They don't know what it is causing, just kind of an explosion of this explosive diarrhea. No pun intended, and sorry for the redundancy there. But mostly a lot in Michigan, some in New York, out in that Midwest area. The FDA had issued a statement a few days ago saying that, they had pinpointed the source of the parasite, and this is an intestinal parasite, right? It can be treated with antibiotics, but it's not a virus or anything like that. It's an actual parasite that usually comes from feces, and it exists on produce. The FDA had indicated that it had traced the parasite and the outbreak to Taylor Farms, which has farms and production centers in Mexico, and it had been lettuce, iceberg lettuce from Taylor Farms. Specifically, they traced it to shredded lettuce shipped to Taco Bell locations, which made some sense. They've since now today, just a few hours ago, and this is July 20th, so I don't know when you're watching or listening to the show, they've since said that now that has been retracted. It was a false positive. So they tested some lettuce from Taylor Farms. They got a positive result for the parasite, but now they are saying that they are retracting. That was a false positive result. And Taylor Farms was quick to say, hey, they apologize. And people are saying, oh, no, we're back to square one. But that's not the case, right? That's not the case. the FDA is now saying, look, just because we got a false positive, that doesn't mean that the rest of our data that we had conducted, the rest of our research is not still pointing to the Taylor Farms outbreak as the primary source of what we're seeing. And so there are still several indicators that the outbreak does stem from lettuce coming from Taylor Farms, and it does originate from lettuce shipped to Taco Bell locations. Just because one of the samples they tested turned out ultimately to be a false positive does not mean that the rest of their data, their epistemological data and all those things have not been indicators that it's Taylor Farms and that it's Taco Bell. So they are saying, look, there was a spokesperson who said it could be, we might find out it's also coming from berries. It's also coming from other lettuce. It's also coming from lettuce from other places. But as of now, they are still pointing towards that Taylor Farms Taco Bell shipping. It's kind of interesting, though. I thought that some of the dysfunction there, you tell everybody where it's coming from, then you say, actually, that was a false positive, but they're not off the hook yet. Taylor Farms comes out and say they got an apology. And one thing I thought was interesting is all these people out there, these, natural folks, these don't trust the government conspiracy theorist type people out there always saying, the government poisons your food and you can't trust them and grow your own food and all that. I mean, growing your own food's one thing, and I understand they think this is an argument in their favor. Look, there's an outbreak. We can't be protected. You have to grow your own food. But at the end of the day, man, isn't this a prime example of needing the government and the entities we have in place to track down and stop the spread of parasites and things like that could exist without any kind of research mechanism or enforcement mechanism or public notification mechanism? We would be completely at the mercy of outbreaks like this, and we wouldn't know that it originated most likely from Taylor Farms and from Taco Bell. And we wouldn't know that it was coming from lettuce or berries or some kind of produce. And we wouldn't know what to avoid, and we'd simply be at the mercy of the parasite. And that's how in the dark ages, before we had these apparatuses of government intervention and regulatory oversight, people did die in mass or become infected in mass with sickness and illness because they had no quality control and they had no monitoring of these things. And you could say all you want, we don't want the government in our food or anything else, but this wasn't the most efficient, but at least they've targeted to a certain location and we have communication. Imagine if we didn't, and imagine if this was even more efficient. I mean, there's how many other parasitic spreads have been thwarted? How many other illnesses and foodborne issues have been stopped because we have the apparatuses that we have in the government and elsewhere to be able to regulate and monitor these things? And speaking of the inefficiencies present in this outbreak, this outbreak comes after the Trump administration earlier this year delayed for 30 months implementation of a federal food traceability rule. That rule was intended to speed outbreak investigations by requiring standardized tools and records showing where high-risk foods originated and where they were shipped. Food safety experts have said the rule would have allowed investigators to trace contaminated lettuce back through the supply chain more quickly, helping to identify the source sooner and potentially prevent additional illnesses. Not to mention all the cuts that have been made to research and in the areas of public health by the Trump administration. These are the things that we as a modern society, as a first world country, take for granted. We say we can cut the sciences, we can cut research, we can cut all these government agencies. 9 out of 10 times you don't have any clue what these agencies or scientists or these funded research projects are even doing. And had this rule been implemented earlier, we might have been able to trace the lettuce and the contaminant quicker and maybe have a more conclusive idea of what was infected, what the extent of the potential exposure was, and all of those things. But instead, we don't, because of these cuts and because of these inefficiencies. So kind of two ends of the coin there, right? Some saying that, well, look, government's not going to be efficient anyway. Look at this outbreak as an example. We have to rely on ourselves. But the very fact that it could have been more efficient, the very fact that we have some notion and some information about where it could have come from, and the very fact that you expect and want those notifications is evidence that the majority of the society wants these regulatory powers in place, needs these regulatory powers in place, and appreciates them. And so you take for granted that somebody somewhere out in the sphere, somewhere in the deep state or wherever, is going to tell you where the parasitic lettuce is coming from. And that's a basic thing you think you have in first world America, that you're going to be notified of where parasites are, or that when you go to Taco Bell, or you go to some restaurant, or you go anywhere else, or you purchase your food at a grocery store, you expect and assume that it's going to be safe to eat. Well, you wouldn't be able to expect and assume that it would be safe to eat unless you had an efficient, normal functioning government structure in place to ensure those things. And so whether you're a conspiracy theorist out there with the deep state and cutting it and gutting it and all those things, or whether you're one of these organic people who think you don't want the government involved in anything, grow your own food, all that, I think there's a meeting in the middle there that efficient inspections of food is a positive for society. And even if you were going to do it yourself, I think it's going to be really difficult, number one. Number two, you could have contaminants because you're not going through the same quality control. And you can say you're going to educate yourself, but we'll see. Right? Long story short, I just thought it was interesting. We take a lot of things for granted, and those things that we've had in place for, the better part of a century here are beneficial to us as a whole. And when they start to break down or they're not functioning properly, you see how exposed we are to something that we had left behind. Right? We don't normally worry about the contaminants in our food at a fast food place. We take that for granted now. But there was a time when you couldn't take that for granted wherever you were eating food, even if you were trading at a market, because that's what you'd have to do, right? You can't completely sustain yourself completely on everything yourself, right? You need somebody who has a certain type of livestock or a certain type of produce or something. You're still going to have to trade with your neighbors. And that quality control is something we now take for granted. But for most of human history, that was every time you ate, every time you drank, that was a much more robust, much more poignant, much more, risk-oriented activity, whereas now it's really not. And this just shows how far we've come and how important these governmental functions really are. So when we're speaking about cutting them, or we're speaking about we don't need them, or the government does nothing but wrong, think about the fact that they're tracing a parasite now and trying to get us an answer and recalling the offending lettuce so that no one else gets sick. It's important stuff, right? Also in the news, Todd Blanche. I don't know, whoever out there doesn't know, I don't know where you've been, but Todd Blanche is the current acting Attorney General of the United States. He's currently going through confirmation process. Now, for those, if you need a quick refresher, Pam Bondi was Donald Trump's first selected Attorney General in the second term. She was confirmed. She was a controversial figure in a lot of ways. She looked to be somebody who was trying to do the bidding of Donald Trump in many ways. There is this thing occurring within the second Trump administration. And there's a theory called the unitary executive theory. And what that theory essentially says is that all divisions and agencies and entities that operate under the executive branch, i.e. all the agencies that the president controls, they essentially are entitled to act as arms of the president, right? They are entitled to act at the direction and at the pleasure and conform to the ideological output and ideological predisposition of whoever occupies the White House at any given time, and their autonomy is significantly limited by what the president wants, right? And there's some logical ways that you can follow that, right? The president appoints certain cabinet members. The executive has long been somebody who we were all taught at a very young age is the person who actually puts into effect and actually implements the laws that Congress creates, right? So there is some logical way that you could follow that, since the president is putting the Attorney General in place, the head of the Food and Drug Administration, the head of the CDC, all these things. The president should have a say ideologically in how these agencies function. But the reality of it is, it's a nuanced and complicated area of our constitutional and our, kind of structural analysis here when we talk about how the United States government functions, because Congress has the power of the purse, right? And that's never been disputed. Congress has the ability to fund certain things, to fund programs, to fund projects, to implement certain laws. That it's long been settled that it's not the president's purview to legislate from the Oval Office unilaterally without the approval of Congress. It's not the president's, it's not the president's prerogative to decide what funding to actually spend and what funding not to spend. It's not on the president's own volition. That was the word I was looking for before. Meaning some states, they have a line item veto, right? So the congressional portion of some states can allocate funding or create funding for something, and the executive of that state, the governor, could line item veto it. Like, well, I veto this amount of funding here. I veto this particular aspect of this particular bill. But the United States notably does not have that ability, right? So this unitary executive theory has come under quite a bit of scrutiny, as it should, because institutionally, as tradition, for a very long time, most of the duration of the existence of the United States, these agencies have not been seen as extensions exclusively of the executive branch, and they have been seen to have more autonomy. Yes, the president gets to flex and exercise their prerogatives by way of making nominations. They can nominate who they want in their cabinet, and presumably, if they are in control of Congress, and if they're not even, but there's compromise there and they are vetted adequately, they will get their nominees into certain agencies, and their nominees will be there based on some indication that they have an ideological position that the current executive believes in. And that's all well and good. But what Donald Trump is trying to do, and what his current administration is trying to do with this unitary executive theory, is to put people in power who literally report to the president. And all these agencies, whether it's environmental protection, whatever it is, they are all, you can see that there might be a problem at any of these agencies if they have to report to the president and do the president's bidding, as opposed to, part of the reason you have an agency that's independent and you would think and want to be autonomous is they are going to have their own interests, right? Congress creates things. If they create the Environmental Protection Agency, or if the Department of Justice exists, if they create the FBI, all these things, presumably the idea is Congress has created an agency for a specific purpose, and within the ecosystem of the executive branch and federal government and government as a whole, this particular entity has a particular mission, which may at times agree with other agencies, at times may agree with the executive's overall agenda, but at times, to protect its own interests, the reasons it was created, may have disagreements with other agencies, even within the executive branch, may have issues and differences with the current executive. And that is supposed to be a natural and healthy function of an operable, honest government, right? In any functional country, that should be what you want, right? If you are established to do a certain task, you should be greedy and selfish with that task, as against any attacks or subversion or efforts to thwart your mission. But under Trump, what we've seen is a lot of people placed into power in these agencies who have no interest in defending the mission of the agency at root, but are more interested in doing whatever Trump's bidding is. For instance, Linda McMahon heading up the Department of Education, her mission, she is now acknowledged time and time again, is to destroy the Department of Education, to dismantle the Department of Education. She's there to do that. She's operating on a bare bones, very minimalist, day-to-day staff and agenda, but in reality, she's trying to wind down that agency. And to me, that's a dishonest approach to running an agency. And I say the same thing for any, like ultra far anti-criminal justice, anti-prison reformer who wants to become the district attorney in a given place just to completely dismantle or take the teeth out of any, the mission, the central mission of those offices. Well, the extreme example in the Trump administration is the Department of Justice, right? The Department of Justice is there to prosecute crime, to do it in an ethical and independent way, and the sanctity of our country, right? The only way you can rely on our country being legitimate, our government being legitimate, anything being just, or anything being worth, maintaining the social contract, is if law enforcement entities are operating on an honest playing field, right? And so part of the controversy with Pam Bondi was that maybe, she was way too closely aligned with the wishes of the president and not as autonomous. Well, when she was pushed aside, essentially forced to resign, basically fired this past spring, I think we got a real look at, Bondi, for all her flaws or for whatever anybody wanted to levy against her as a criticism. Once Bondi left and Todd Blanche took over as Attorney General, we saw a flurry of things happen that many would say are quite problematic in terms of having an independent Attorney General in the United States rather than somebody who directly is essentially working for the president and at the behest of the president. Todd Blanche is the current acting Attorney General. Trump has now nominated him. He succeeded Pam Bondi. Trump has now nominated him to become the next Attorney General of the United States. Now, before he was acting Attorney General, while Bondi was still there, he's the one, if you don't remember, he's the one who interviewed Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's wife, lover, whatever, accomplice, who is currently serving a federal prison sentence for trafficking young women and helping to facilitate what Jeffrey Epstein did. Ghislaine Maxwell was interviewed by Todd Blanche in July of 2025. And that's when she said, basically, well, I don't know of any wrongdoing that Trump did. And after Blanche spoke to her and she said that she didn't know of any wrongdoing, she was transferred to a minimum security prison in Texas. And a lot of commentators out there surmised and suspected that because she came out and said what she did about Trump not having anything to do with it, to try to exonerate him or get out in front of the Epstein controversy, what have you, because Trump, remember, was trying to suppress the release of the Epstein files. It took congressional bipartisanship to force him to release the files. Some say Todd Blanche still is not in full compliance with that law. Nonetheless, Blanche was the guy who went and talked to Ghislaine Maxwell right before she got transferred to a minimum security prison. Blanche was Trump's personal lawyer. He represented him in the Stormy Daniels hush money case. So Blanche has been operating for the interest of Trump for a very long time. Now, Blanche was an assistant United States attorney in Southern District of New York prior to going into private practice. By all accounts at that time, he was relatively respected. He didn't have necessarily any big splashes or any, huge controversies. He just operated as a typical assistant United States attorney would in the Southern District. But once he went private, he represented Donald Trump. He used to be a Democrat. He switched to being a Republican ever since this Trump thing started. And he made a mistake in his confirmation hearing. So his hearings have been going on. And he made a mistake in his confirmation hearing. Senator Kennedy from Louisiana asked him a softball question. Basically, do you consider Donald Trump a friend? And Blanche responded, I am his attorney, and then corrected himself very quickly. I was his attorney. Essentially saying that the attorney general, who's supposed to be autonomous, who's supposed to uphold the principle that nobody is above the law, who is supposed to be making discretionary decisions based on their legal expertise and in the interest of justice, is saying that he's Trump's lawyer. Present tense. I know it could be a fraudulent slip, but it was a very costly one if you're looking at where his allegiances lie. Now, ever since Blanche has taken over, he indicted James Comey for the seashell case where somebody had written on the beach, not Comey, 8647. A lot of people just say, get him out of the office. Doesn't mean kill him. Doesn't mean anything like that. Just get him out of office. They indicted Comey for taking a picture of that and reposting it. Very controversial indictment, especially considering the First Amendment, especially considering the substantive underlying meaning, what it does, what it doesn't mean, given that Comey was the former director of the FBI, given that they'd already tried to indict Comey prior, and now they throw this indictment at the wall, which most legal commentators think is dubious. Todd Blanche was the main prosecutor there, trying to push that through. He was the acting attorney general when they indicted the Southern Poverty Law Center, a long-time anti-hate group and an organization which, yes, occasionally had informants infiltrated and within certain hate groups that they would give financial benefits to feed them information. Now it's a right-wing talking point on every right-wing media source you can get that, Southern Poverty Law Center funded hate. They funded the KKK. It's amazing what the MAGA right-wing megaphone and media sphere does in terms of distorting things and just repeating falsehoods over and over and over and over and over and over again until John Q, next door neighbor who watches too much of it, starts reciting it to you as if it's unequivocated, objective fact. And this is one of the things. Southern Poverty Law Center funds the KKK. They fund, okay. It's quite a leap, but that's what was responsible for that. It was the DOJ's indictment of the Southern Poverty Law Center under Todd Blanche. If you're of the Attorney General of the United States and you're acting in the best interest of the taxpayers and the people of the United States, right? When you go to court and you're a federal prosecutor under the DOJ, it's the people of the United States versus whoever, right? You're supposed to represent the people of the United States, but you're up there letting it slip that you're Trump's attorney, not the people of the United States' attorney. And you're crafting deals inside the current regime that grant immunity, no matter what, to Trump and grant him the ability to, or you the ability to basically administer a slush fund to allies of the president with the taxpayers' money. I think it's a huge conflict of interest. There are numerous ethical questions that come along with that. And like many of the people that have been nominated by Trump after really engaging in really ethically questionable things, I still think there's a good chance that he gets through the Senate because of just the sheer allegiance and the fact that people can't pass up the chance to put a reliable conservative in office, whether it's ethical or not. But it remains to be seen whether Cornyn's going to vote to put Blanche through to the next level where he'll be able to get voted on by the full Senate, or whether he will get held up and Trump will have to nominate somebody else. But it's just really is alarming, just objectively. It's alarming that somebody who has been involved with those types of things and just blatant self-dealing by Trump is even up for something like that and may get approved. It's alarming on so many levels, philosophically and just practically that could occur. It just seems like there's no consequences for blatant self-dealing. The United States is also suffering from inflation, rising prices due to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. When Trump was asked about this, he said that the consumer and prices, inflation, those things did not enter his mind at all when he was thinking about Iran and what the war and how it was going. And it's really, they can say that the economic indicators are boding okay. They can say that it hasn't been as bad as they thought it would be. I've heard that some places, and I just don't understand it. As somebody who has to go to the grocery store, as somebody who has to pay for fuel, as somebody who has to do those things, the fact that prices are once again on the rise and continue to, at least partially due to the closures of the strait and at least partially due to this war, is not something that I enjoy or that I take kindly to, especially when we've already been through the ringer with the COVID inflation, all those things. It's just poor form. And the thing with the Iranian war is I find it really interesting with respect to Trump. First and foremost, he always said, he was the art of the deal, great deal maker, make a great deal. You got to remember, when it comes to Iran, Obama had a deal. He released funds, Iran got money, and they agreed to halt their enrichment programs and to allow inspections and to all these things for a period of time. That agreement could have well been renewed at some point when the expiration was approaching, and Iran would be much farther away from actually having the enriched uranium and the technology to be able to have a nuclear weapon. But instead, Trump tore that up in his first term for no real reason other than just sheer arrogance and just vindictiveness and, again, short-sightedness, because he's not well versed on foreign affairs. He's not well versed on conflicts in Iran and any other Middle Eastern area. He's not well versed in things, and he's not very good at making the correct and strategic decisions. So he rips that up in his first term, and Iran gets so much closer to developing a nuclear weapon. Now the United States essentially has its back against the wall. It has to, some time ago, drop the bunker blasting bombs, or whatever they call them, that are able to penetrate the bunkers deep in mountains in Iran. They do that about a year ago, and Trump declares that they've completely obliterated Iran's ability to have a nuclear weapon, only now to say they had to go to war again because Iran was too close to having a nuclear weapon, and he can't make any agreement with them to end the conflict, even if it helps the U.S. taxpayer or the U.S. citizen struggling to make purchases, or any of the other people and oil exporters, importers, whatever, who need to get in and out of the Strait of Hormuz. He doesn't care about that because the primary and paramount concern is Iran with a nuclear weapon. But I thought you solved that with the bunker blasting bombs. I thought that you were going to get a better deal than Obama had on Iran. I thought you had to rip up his agreement because your agreement was going to be so much better. So much better. And you're the art of the deal. The art of the deal, and make the best deals ever. Everybody knows Iran is going to be the best deal you ever saw. You make the deals, but you have said, we made a deal, we don't have a deal. We made a deal, we don't have a deal. And it's crazy because just today, the White House just today posted a tweet declaring that there was overwhelming support for the Iran ceasefire deal amongst Americans. That it was like 60 to 30% approval for the deal. But the deal is off. Trump said the deal is off. We're fighting. People are dying. And it's not funny. People are dying. The strait is closed. Combat continues. Iran is now attacking the U.S. directly in those areas with their drones. Their drones keep coming. They're inexpensive. Compared to the missiles we use to fight off the drones are inexpensive. It's a tactical disadvantage. Iran's control of the Strait of Hormuz is a tactical disadvantage. And what's interesting about all this is Kamala Harris. It was one of the most, the hard-hitting things she said that I thought really landed was she said Trump is going to be influenced by foreign leaders. Whoever flatters him the most is going to get what they want from him. And by all accounts now, and all the reporting we've seen regarding this Iranian conflict, Benjamin Netanyahu sat in the office with Trump and convinced him to enter this war and to attack Iran. The same Benjamin Netanyahu who seems to want to willfully sabotage any peace agreement that the United States might have with Iran, because that's not what Netanyahu wants. He wants to be able to continue attacking Hezbollah. He wants to continue to be attacking Iran. He wants the full force of the United States behind him in doing this. But by all accounts, Netanyahu met with Trump. He told him, he used the success of Maduro to convince Trump, stroke his ego, make him think you're going to go in, it's going to be swift, you're going to take out the supreme leader, you're going to go out in glorious victory, you're going to be able to pat yourself on the back, the American people are going to love you, they're going to see you as some victor, some conquester, and it's going to be light work. You're going to go in there, you're going to win easily, just like you did with kidnapping Maduro or whatever, arresting him, however you want to call it. And people like Rubio, like Vance, other people high up in the administration reportedly said, this is nonsense. This is BS. There is no way that, given the realities within the regime, the realities on the ground in Iran, the realities of the situation, that this is going to be an easy win. There is no way that this is going to be something that's beneficial to us. Nonetheless, Trump, just like Harris warned us, ego was stroked, makes a rash and bad decision, gets us into a war that now he can't find his way out of. The only deal that was on the table, by the way, which was basically a memorandum of understanding, meaning we have basic parameters we might agree on, but we have to hammer out the details. Well, the details turned out to be an impasse, and now we're back in the conflict. He can't get us out of this conflict, even though he kept saying he was against forever wars. And so many people vote. I remember a guy overheard at the diner, still to this day, saying, "Oh, what do you like about Trump? Well, he keeps us out of war. He keeps us out of war." That was a silly excuse. because he's not doing that at all. He's doing the exact opposite of that now. Because he can't make a deal. He doesn't understand geopolitics. He doesn't understand the realities of how things go. He doesn't have a good strategic sense other than how to convince people to get angry enough to come out and vote for him when he tells his lies. And so here we are in this ongoing conflict with Iran, and it continues, and we lose service members today. While the White House is posting how much people love the deal, that isn't happening. That is now set aside as we continue to fight. And it seems like Trump doesn't really care, right? Because the American people are not happy about this war. And even a lot of his coalition that carried him to victory in 2024 is not happy about this war. But it seems that he doesn't care much. I think his agenda is to keep ramming through whatever he wants to demand loyalty and to try to find a way, as best he can, to win the midterms despite being terribly unpopular. And if you look at what he's done so far, the whole gerrymandering war, everybody celebrates, oh, Virginia got struck down, Democrats can't gerrymander to give themselves more districts. That all started with Trump. As soon as he got into office, really not long after, he started telling Texas and other red states, start gerrymandering to give us more seats. Because he knew he was going to do things that the American people didn't like. But he knew he could try to find a way to secure his majorities and to insulate and protect his power regardless, to make him unaccountable to the U.S. voter. So if you're somebody out there who claims you're a rugged individualist, you're a rugged patriot, you believe in freedom, you sing the song, at least I live in America, or at least I know I'm free, or whatever, proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free, that's the song. You can't be repping that and then be supporting a guy who's actively trying to gerrymander and find every way possible to limit and restrict voting just so that he could win. And the latest thing that happened was the D.C. Circuit Court, Federal District, D.C. Circuit Court, not the district, the circuit. They ruled in Trump's favor with respect to a United States Postal Service rule. And here's what's going on with that. The United States Postal Service proposed a rule in May wherein they would monitor every person who received a mail-in ballot. And they would get voting lists from the states that they would then decide who was eligible to vote and who wasn't eligible to vote. And it's all under the guise of all these, illegal people are voting. All this nonsense that they keep saying that a lot of people out there regurgitate. A lot of you regurgitate. It's a shame. All these illegals are voting, and the USPS is going to determine who legitimately gets a mail-in ballot and who doesn't. And part of this was a ploy to get blue states, those who haven't been paying attention. The federal government has been trying under Trump to get voter lists from the states since he's been back in office. Now, what their purpose is, I don't know. There's been a lot of documented shenanigans out in Arizona in the last election, other things where they try to confuse people. Some people petition to kick somebody off a voter roll based on erroneous information, and then the person has to prove that they are eligible to vote. It's all a ruse just to discourage people from voting, to bring down voting numbers, to give Trump and his cronies a better chance of winning elections, even when they are vastly unpopular and should lose. And the USPS proposed a rule that would allow them to do that. Now, NAACP sued to stop the rule, and injunctions were granted in Massachusetts and in D.C. This was not involving the Massachusetts ruling, which still has the proposed rule on hold. This was the D.C. ruling, where now the Circuit Court in D.C. said, and this was a thing I found really odd, they said that it would cause irreparable harm to the United States Postal Service if they're not able to implement this rule before the election. Essentially saying, you can't do that to the United States Postal Service. They need to implement this rule so that they can restrict voting. If voting actually happens this term, if people actually can vote, they're going to be irreparably harmed. They couldn't stop the votes. Which is a backwards logic, because you think you would rule in favor of the U.S. voter, saying, well, there's irreparable harm if the U.S. Postal Service is able to implement this rule and people can't vote in the midterms, and then their vote doesn't count, and the election occurs through means that aren't legitimate or are not, adequate or correct, and now they have irreparable harm because the election went away that it shouldn't have. That's irreparable harm, much more so than the USPS's interest. But this is what happened in the D.C. Circuit Court just yesterday. And so for now, they also ruled that the lawsuit was not yet ripe, and it was not yet ripe because the rule hasn't been implemented, or the rule doesn't exist yet. It's just a proposed rule, so it's premature to sue based on a rule that's simply proposed. So there's a lot of legal jargon and legal maneuvering going on here, but suffice to say that Trump is using any means possible to try to give the federal government and agencies under his control, again, with respect to this unitary executive theory, the ability to access voter rolls and to control what's going on in state elections. And the reason they're doing this is to try to circumvent a long held standard in the United States that all elections, even federal elections, the jurisdiction to govern those elections, how those elections occur, that is vested in the states. And so Trump's trying to find ways to circumvent that long-standing rule and give the federal government more control over it, probably because he wants to find a way to tweak the election in his favor. And this is not somebody that we can trust to handle elections. Let's just keep it 100% real. This is a man who still claims he won the 2020 election, who still claims that the 2020 election was fraud. Meanwhile, he lost the 2020 election, and then he was charged in an indictment in Georgia and elsewhere with trying to steal and manipulate the election. We heard him on the phone in Georgia telling them, I just need 11,000 votes. You're going to give me 11,000 votes. That's all I need, 11,000 votes. Trying to bargain back and forth with whether he's allowed. You can just take the election. Trying to bargain for an election. Literally trying to steal an election. So you cannot trust the wolf in the hen house on elections. The man lost in 2020, continues to say he won, and continues to lie, and was literally charged with the crime of trying to steal and manipulate the election. And now he wants control of the elections. You can't make it up. And this all follows. There has been multiple attempts that they've used to try to disenfranchise voters, to try to manipulate elections. And one of the things that occurred was Mississippi had a law, which many states have, where as long as a mail-in ballot was sent, as long as it was mailed in on the day of the election, as long as it was mailed in no later than election day itself, think about it. You're physically casting your vote on election day, but it just has to arrive at the polling place so they can count it. As long as you voted and sent it in on election day, they would continue to count it even after election day. Now this goes in, for those who don't remember, don't understand, don't want to believe, whatever it is, let me recount and rehash what happened in 2020. In 2020, Trump and his cronies knew that he was very unpopular. COVID was killing the country. There were all kinds of other things going on. Trump was likely to lose the election in 2020. It was almost a foregone conclusion in many ways, right? They knew that because of COVID and restrictions and people being scared to go outside, things like that, that a lot of people were going to vote by mail. They knew that because the population centers, just by sheer volume, the cities in this country have more people, and the logistical complications in counting ballots of millions of people in somewhere like Philadelphia, as opposed to hundreds or thousands of people in rural districts, that it was going to be quite an undertaking for populous cities to count all these mail-in ballots. So they purposely, and this happened in Pennsylvania, you can go research it, look it up. Trump and his cronies got together and they purposely passed laws in certain states, namely Pennsylvania, because they knew Philadelphia and Pittsburgh were there. And they knew it was a swing state. And they had a friendly legislature in Pennsylvania at the time. They passed laws which made it illegal to count mail-in ballots before same-day ballots. Why did they do that? Because they knew that if you wouldn't allow poll workers to count mail-in ballots first, they knew that the majority of their voters, because Trump was clamoring against mail-in ballots, it's been his thing forever, telling all his supporters to vote the day of, because this is all part of a concerted effort. You guys love conspiracies? This is a conspiracy. This is a real conspiracy, okay? This is a true PSYOP conspiracy that you can research and figure out for yourself, and you let it slide for these maniacal, nonsensical conspiracies about pizzerias and whatever else. He knew, then he put those laws in place, and then he told his voters to only vote the day of. He knew that what would happen is that on the day of voting, when they counted the in-person ballots first, it would look like he was winning because the same day vote, the in-person vote, was going to skew toward him. So he knew that on election night, as they were counting the same day vote, he knew it would look like he was winning. And he always planned, and he did, he planned to then come out at that time and say, look, I'm winning. And once they count these mail-in ballots, I'm going to lose because it's fraud. It was never fraud. It was just that the mail-in ballots were going to be coming mainly from these populous cities with all these logistical issues. Milwaukee, Philadelphia, these places were going to have boatloads of mail-in ballots because they skewed Democratic and because there's just so many more people in those cities. They were going to take longer to count. If you count 10 things or you count 1,000 things, it's always going to take longer to count the 1,000 things. It's not because of fraud. It's not because of any of that. It's simply because there's a lot of votes. So he always knew it was going to take a while to count all these mail-in ballots. So he knew he was going to come out and declare that he won and that everything else was fraud. And there's so many people out there who still regurgitate it, and it's such elementary juvenile logic. Well, he was winning until they brought out the trucks. Bring a truck. Somebody found the truck of votes. Where did these votes come from? They came from the voters in the cities. Where did all these votes come from? I refer to it as kindergarten logic, right? It's like the kindergartner talking to his friends. His friend says, there's no Santa Claus. It's just your parents. Think about it. A guy coming from a chimney. It's ridiculous. And the kid says, with his kindergarten, very innocent logic, says, well, I went to sleep and there were no presents under the tree. And I woke up and there were presents there. So Santa must exist. It's kinder logic. It's silly. It eliminates all other things. Well, he was winning at 5 and then he was losing in the morning. Must have been fraud. No, must have been votes. And the fact that he made it so you couldn't count mail-in ballots. Couldn't count them. By law and by design. That was why they did it. That's the exact reason. Just to make it look like there was fraud or so that he could claim there was fraud, he made it illegal to count the ballots before in certain states. Now in Mississippi, they had the law that as long as they were postmarked the date of election day, you could keep counting it. Republicans wanted to say that you had to stop counting. You had to stop counting after Election Day. Well, the Supreme Court of the United States, in a 5-4 decision written by Justice Amy Coney Barrett, declared that that would be unconstitutional. The states are free to govern their own elections, their own way, and if Mississippi wants to do the right thing, which is they deem it just to count votes, as long as you cast it by Election Day, you get counted. It's arbitrary to stop counting. The vote is what matters. You voting by Election Day is what matters. The counting is irrelevant. It's just counting what was already cast. So to stop counting after Election Day is just absurd. But it just feeds into this absurd ridiculousness and this agenda that Trump has had to try to manipulate elections, find ways to lower Democratic margins in certain states, find ways to have favorable outcomes to himself so that he doesn't have to be accountable to you. So that he doesn't have to be accountable to the U.S. voter for the chaos and havoc and incompetence that he's displaying as the president. And it's worth keeping an eye on because the latest thing Trump did, he's trying to pass this SAVE Act, which has all these provisions in it that try to do exactly what I just said. Restrict the vote, find ways to trim down the vote and help him and disenfranchise different types of voters based on their preferences, based on who they think they're going to be favorable to in an election so that he can get away with the midterms even though he's vastly unpopular and he has to be held accountable to the voters. Doesn't want to be accountable to the voters. So the latest thing he did in his effort, now the SAVE Act is his voting policy. That is not going to get through the Senate because the Senate has a filibuster. And Democrats wouldn't break the filibuster. People were very mad at them on the left. And now Republicans won't break the filibuster. It means you need 60 votes, at least 60 votes, a supermajority, to pass certain legislation. and there are just not enough votes in the Senate to pass the SAVE Act. I keep seeing these people on social media talking about passing the SAVE Act, and the administration, since he has a direct line to most of these social media influencers, you guys go out there and you listen to these guys nonstop as if they're some organic grassroots movement you can trust, but they're getting fed talking points from the administration, which is probably the most anti-freedom, anti-subversive, rebellious thing you can do is just regurgitate what the president wants you to regurgitate. But these people are all out there talking about the SAVE Act and all that, but it has not a prayer of passing in the current Senate because it doesn't have the votes. But Trump, it doesn't stop him from doing a press conference last week on Thursday. Another one of these ridiculous press conferences. We have real problems in this country. Inflation, the war in Iran, all these other things. And he holds a press conference on voter integrity and whatever else. Some of the major networks don't even air it. He threatens to try to take their licenses away. But no one's giving you a prop. You're like the boy who cried wolf. So many times you've had these ridiculous press conferences and announcements. They've never amounted to much of anything. You're a divisive figure. You don't sound presidential. You never do. You're self-serving. You're cutting yourself backroom deals to alleviate your family from IRS audits. You're giving yourself slush funds. Who wants to hear you in prime time make some nonsensical address? They don't have to air it. They didn't air it. I'm glad the ones who didn't air it didn't. But he comes out and he says, China has U.S. voter data, which we've known for a long time, and it's really sad and it's scary that China does have U.S. voter data. Now, he didn't really give any information or release anything that proved China manipulated any election, but he just said they have our voter data. They have a lot of information on us. They got a lot of information on us through TikTok. Again, you want a conspiracy? Look in your own phone. TikTok. It manipulates your mind. It alters your attention span. It feeds you certain things algorithmically. And it collects your face, collects identifiers, collects information. And it was a Chinese company for a very long time. And our Congress tried to ban it or force a complete divestment from China. And Trump thwarted that too. He got in the way of it because TikTok influencers helped him. And he likes to use social media algorithms for his own benefit. And he thwarted that effort too. But China has a lot of information on us. They get it in all different ways. TikTok's just one of them. And he did say they had our information, but that doesn't show anything about election integrity or anything that helps him. They made vast claims about illegals being registered to vote in various states. We don't know if those lists are accurate. There have been instances where these lists that they've compiled list people who have been naturalized. They used to be aliens here on a visa or whatever, but they've since been naturalized, and they wrongly say that person is illegal. There was also zero evidence that anybody actually did vote who was illegal. Even if they have some names that they allege are registered to vote, they don't have any proof and haven't shown any proof, at least, that anybody did vote. Ironically, what the release of documents did show following Trump's press conference, what it ironically showed was that Russia interfered in the 2020 election, and Russia interfered on behalf of Donald Trump and interfered against Joe Biden. And if you want to know what the better choice for president should be if you're an American citizen, probably the guy that your enemy doesn't want you to have, right? Russia wants us to have Trump. It probably means it's bad for us because Russia is not a friendly flyer with us, just so you know. But the documents ironically show that they tried to intervene on behalf of Trump. Again, it doesn't show that it worked. It doesn't show they actually infiltrated American society. But it did show that Russia spread information about Hunter Biden and Ukraine, including Burisma. Russian trolls were very much fanning the flames of the Hunter Biden Ukraine thing, which again, you guys and the Trump folks out there seem to regurgitate quite a bit. For all the independent thinking and question everything in truth, you seem to regurgitate a lot of what's coming out of Trump and his administration's mouth, and whatever's coming out of Putin and Russia. You guys seem to just be regurgitating a lot of propaganda for some people who are saying to be so independent. Pretty interesting stuff. That Russia was spreading a lot of Hunter Biden stuff, and Russia was trying to help Trump win. Ironic that Trump released that information. Turns out Russia was in fact trying to help him. Also important to note that Trump has cut millions of dollars in federal funding from the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, known as the CISA, which helps state and local election officials keep elections secure, and disbanded an FBI task force focused on investigating foreign influence operations, including those that target U.S. elections. So he cut the people that could actually defend us against fraudulent elections. And he's trying to maneuver ways to give himself more control of elections. And then he comes out and says there's issues with our election integrity, and the papers he releases show that Russia is trying to help him. I'm not a rocket scientist, but I do believe in logic. And I care about logic very deeply. And it seems to me that maybe we should be worried about Trump. And we should be worried about making sure our elections are free and fair, not because of Trump, but maybe in spite of Trump, if we want to actually watch out for our own self-interest as American citizens and as self-proclaimed patriots. But that's just the logic talking. Don't get too sensitive about it. While I was doing this show, Trump also said he was going to levy 50% tariffs on a bunch of Canadian goods. So there we go. Our number one trade partner is now once again getting 50% tariffs levied on them so we can get more inflation. Yippee and yahoo. It's just such a great time, isn't it? Guys, I just wanted to run down the news. I know it wasn't all pleasant, and it wasn't really we haven't done a deep dive into the immersive, logical nuances that this show is going to entail most of the time. But news is still important. Commentary on the news, being informed about the news is still important. And I wanted to hop on and just run down some of those things with you. So we've accomplished that today. There will be the episode on heroes and justice. And I think it's going to be a really provocative and thought-provoking episode. So make sure you tune into that. We are going to have several other episodes on the agenda, several guests and other things joining us. So make sure you keep it locked here to the Logic and Larry podcast. Remember, click subscribe. It's right here. It takes a second. Just click the subscribe button and help the channel grow. Remember, we are also available as an audio podcast wherever you get your podcasts. So check us out. Keep it logical. Try to keep your senses and your wits about you as we move through the insanity that this world is around us. But we can maintain logic, rationality, and objectivity, and we can keep it real, and we can also spread the legitimate news to people so that they are well informed, and just think critically about it, right? Think critically about what we're hearing, and who do we really want in places of power, and how does the society best function? And it shouldn't be serving one ideology or one particular person. It should be accountable to the public. It should be objective. It should be justice-minded. Keep those things in mind as we move through these news stories. Any big updates, keep it locked here. I may also drop little tidbits here and there on Instagram or on YouTube in shorts. Not a full-length show, but just little tidbits to talk to you about the news if things should arise. Guys, enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy that fading light of summer as the days get shorter. Larry K is out.